Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. Today I'm joined by Dillon Rogers, developer at New Blood and currently working on the immersive sim Gloomwood. Hi Dillon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you again for joining me and making time today. So, to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about Gloomwood and, yourself and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a game developer. I've been doing it for a little over a decade now. Um, and Gloomwood is kind of my first like big project, I would say. I'm used to doing smaller stuff before it. But it I had reached the point with my skills that I was like, okay, I want to do a bigger game that I'm gonna put on a store and people are gonna try it out. And I kind of looked at some of what my favorite games were and decided to do an immersive sim. And over time, it picked up enough that I sent a demo to New Blood, and now it's a New Blood game.
Oh, that's awesome. And doing it for over or working on games for over a decade. So that means you would have probably seen, a lot of trends coming and going. Is there a reason? I shouldn't put it this way. What made you want to make a immersive sim like Gloomwood that harkens back to, some of the older games from the 90s?
So the interesting thing is that at my age, I didn't actually get to experience Thief and System Shock as a kid because my family got a computer a little late, so I never got to play Thief 1 and 2 when they came out. Really, it was actually later when I was like a teenager and especially early on in college that I went back and played like all the old shooters and immersive sims. I was just kind of trying to rediscover like all these old games from the past that I'd never really gone through, but wanted the experience and like the knowledge of. And so at that time, I went back and played the old Looking Glass games, um, and I fell in love with them. Like Thief. Thief actually took me a little while to get into because I wasn't really a stealth player at the time, but the world really brought me in and just sort of inspired me, and I loved everything about it, and just kind of fell into being like, oh yeah, these are the kind of games that I want to strive for, the kind of worlds that I want to like build, and yeah, it was just sort of it was just like a moment where I felt like I kind of knew the kind of stuff I wanted to make from that point.
And that's really great because I think to a good degree that I'm kind of on the same level as you in terms of um, when I was, in the 90s when these games, like when these older games would have came out, especially Thief and System Shock and other Looking Glass games, I would have been not old enough to fully, I think, understand the mechanics and everything that needs to happen. Because at that point, I had been playing other first person shooters like Duke Nukem, Doom, Quake, what have you. And
Hmm.
all of that was very, very straightforward. Here's gun, go, shoot. That's it. Just keep moving forward. Um, so I think I can relate to what you're saying about going back when you're older and being able to enjoy like these older games that were a little more technical in what they were trying to do and have a far greater appreciation for them. Um, so yeah, so I just want to say, I fully understand where you're coming from there, and I think a lot of other people probably would as well, just because these games are are just great games, and I think it's fantastic what you're doing with Gloomwood because I just recently I played through the demo, and I'd meant to ages ago, and I finally just got around to it, and I felt that it was fantastic, and it made me realize what I wish I was able to have enjoyed when I was younger, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Um, and as well, watching what you're doing and uploading onto your YouTube channel with the new mechanics, I guess you would say, that are, you're playing with, or are hopefully going to be in the future games, or not future games, for the future, the final version. Um, it makes me really excited because obviously there's a lot more to it than what's just in the demo, and I think that's just fantastic.
Yeah. The demo came out at an interesting point of time, which was I had started working with New Blood, and um, Dave at New Blood has a very close relationship to the games that he publishes, which is why he doesn't publish like everybody. He publishes only a couple games because he likes to have a lot of like back and forth and uh not like control in the sense that like he tells us what to do, but he likes to have like a collaboration. So when I sent him the demo, he really liked it, but he was like, "Hey, I think we should work on trying to appeal in this direction." And in that case, it was more in the sort of like this feels sort of like thief and um kind of old school looking glass, because the game always had the immersive sim roots, but I don't think it quite realized when I was sending them the demo. So the demo that everyone else got to play had a bit more of that going on, and over time we've solidified like, okay, yeah, this is supposed to kind of feel like a Thief and like System Shock 2 kind of mix. uh like, how can we sort of capture that the best that we can? And so everything that we've done since releasing that public demo has been trying to capture like, oh, what should the player options be, what would be an interesting thing for the player to be able to do at this point of time. And yeah, it's been very neat, because when people tell me like, "Oh, I love the demo," I'm just sort of internally like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna love what you see when we release the next part," because the demo now feels really like crusty to a lot of us on the team. We're like, "Oh, this is kind of old and missing a lot of the stuff that is in the current version."
Hmm. And like I said, because when I went preparing to talk with you, I went looking and I found your YouTube channel, and and I also read elsewhere about you talking about an inventory system. I think that might have been on Twitter or Steam or something.
Hmm.
And the moment I saw that, it in practice, and like the gibbing, and you being able to, for whatever reason, unbeknownst to me at this time, whatever reason, being able to take body parts and research them, and keep them in your inventory and everything. It has me very excited because it looks like it's going to be absolutely fantastic, and it looks like it's going to be wild, and it sounds fantastic as well that that New Blood is in that uh, collaborative sense, um, as a publisher, because it's I imagine it would be concerning to or not concerning. I'm going to phrase it this way. I imagine it makes you feel really good to have a publisher that is encouraging uh, you to make like the best version or vision or what have you of the game, versus just telling you to, yeah, just keep doing this and release it. Um, no comment necessary on that if you don't want, but that's just.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. Absolutely. I honestly feel ridiculously lucky that I landed into that group. The reason why I actually ended up being at New Blood was I I had started messaging David, the creator of Dusk, on Twitter um, during Dusk's development, like during the early development, when he was still getting out the pre alpha demo. And he was interested in Gloomwood as well, but I didn't have really anything to show him at that point. And I sort of like over time I was talking to him a lot, and I ended up sort of helping him on Dusk in a few little ways. Like I helped with a little bit of the like technical programming for uh, especially the last boss, but also just sort of like sketches for level ideas and little other tidbits like that. And over time, we kind of we bonded over our love of immersive sims. Like clearly, David loves immersive sims too. There's a there's a couple Thief references in Dusk, um, and at the at some point of time, David messaged me and was like, "Hey, we're having our company like Thursday meetings, and we're arguing about the definition of immersive sims. And I want to bring you in because I know you're like obsessed with immersive sims." And so I joined the New Blood chat, internal like development chat, like that way, and just never left. And yeah, that sort of got my foot in the door to like show them the Gloomwood demo, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on this kind of thing." And David and Dave are both sort of like they love Thief. Like Dave uh, played Thief when it came out, and was sort of like, "Oh yeah, I want something that kind of feels like the first time I played Thief." And that's sort of the feeling that it sort of gave him.
Hmm. And like that's just awesome that you're able to be part of a company that does that. And it's also hilarious that you just sort of showed up for cocktail hour and you just never left.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to follow up on this one just um because you said it and I feel it's a great place to go. So you said you're obsessed with immersive sims. I've seen you posting um stalker photos on your Twitter for the last few days. My timeline could be off either way. I've seen you posting that. Um, as well, the comment about helping with Dusk. Are you the reason that the one episode is seems to be heavily influenced by the layout for Call of Pripyat?
No, David is also a massive Dusk fan, so all the influences in there that are like that feel stalkery, that's all him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're both really big Stalker fans.
As I think everyone should be. Once you can get past the uh Eurojank of it, it's
Yeah.
it's a fantastic game. Um, so yeah, there's something else I also want to follow up on with you, just because on the topic of immersive sims and New Blood especially, where they seem to be publishing um, all sorts of old school RPG or not RPG, old school first person shooter games. I don't know why I said RPG. Um,
David wishes.
Oh, that's fantastic. It leads well into my next question then. Um, but a lot of what I see published, and I haven't played everything, so if I'm saying things incorrectly there, my apologies to everyone involved and listening. But like you have Dusk, which I would personally kind of put into the Quake era of shooters. A medieval, I believe, was a New Blood game.
Hmm.
Um, is as well in my mind, a Quake era shooter, mostly just because of the strafe jumping and all of that fun stuff. Yours is into the Looking Glass era of immersive sims with like Thief and System Shock, if you will. Um, so with you working at New Blood, and this isn't me asking for things in New Blood, just things that were probably discussed there. Um, and your love of immersive sims. What do you think is the current landscape for us to see the next era? Which I personally kind of put Deus Ex as into that, that entry into the next level or era or what have you. What's your view on that?
So do you mean like the current trend of like immersive sims coming back?
I think I phrased it wrong. but yes, that basically, yeah, what I was trying to ask is, what's your view? Do you think we have something like that on the landscape or on the horizon, or do you think we're really ready for that with that to be on the horizon?
I definitely think that the interest in immersive sims is coming back, especially from the indie side, because the AAA side kind of had their immersive sim resurgence already, like with the Dishonored and the new Deus Ex games and Prey and such. But from the indie side, it's been it's it's been more difficult because it's more difficult to pull off those kind of games as smaller teams. They're very lofty, complicated games to make. But I think after the retro shooter movement, it kind of opened the door to, well, we can make sort of games that feel like 90s kind of, first person campaign games. The natural sort of conclusion was, what other genres from the 90s can we do? And immersive sims is totally kind of next on the block. And I definitely have seen a lot more people announcing immersive sims, or like, putting out demos for immersive sims from the indie side. Like, aside from Gloomwood, um, there's there's Graven from 3DR. There's they're also making another one called Core Decay. They're making there's another little noir one called Shadow of Doubt. Um, there's a lot of little like projects, um, and there's a really janky um, Polish one called I always mess up the name, like Peripetia.
Oh, mhm.
Um, but all these little like these projects that are coming up, both from more established indie developers like New Blood and 3DR, but also from like really small solo project teams, and that's a good sign. That means that there's a lot of like sort of interest and experimentation in the genre, and so I'm excited to see uh, where this genre of like new indie immersive sims sort of goes.
And definitely, and so am I. I kind of came into the scene a little later than some, I think, in that, I kind of saw it on the horizon, but I was always focused elsewhere. So I'm kind of lucky in that I came into it when, Dusk was pretty much already out, and Medieval was out. And this, Ion Fury, I'm probably screwing the name up wrong. But, a bunch of these retro games or inspired games were already on the scene. So, I got really lucky in that I already have this nice basket full, and it's fantastic to know that from just the names you said that there's another large handful of games on the horizon that could lead to even more. Um, Especially if it eventually leads to uh, like first person RPG immersive ones like Deus Ex, which and I only spotlight that one is because that was for me my moment of realizing what a first person shooter could be, if that makes sense. I know a lot of people fall back on Half-Life, but for me it was Deus Ex that kind of went, no, there can be way more than just this.
Absolutely. I mean, Deus Ex is amazing. Like, the Liberty Island is such an amazing like intro level. It's just like, oh my goodness, I can't even believe a game is capable of pulling this off.
Yeah, like that's just sheer um craziness that they were able to achieve all of that. Because for me personally, I don't think I ever played before that an open world, open hub or what have you, world like that. I had played the demos for Thief, but those games at the time I would have been a couple years younger, and they just wouldn't have clicked for me. So they could have been there. I just wouldn't have experienced or appreciated it. You know.
Yeah.
So, following up from there, you had mentioned that you didn't get into immersive sims until you were a little older. Um, did you have a favorite game when you were younger? You know, maybe before you were able to play immersive sims.
Yeah, so as I noted earlier, my family kind of got a decent computer a little late, but before then we had kind of a weak desktop that was sort of like mostly for just like writing and printing stuff. But it could run a couple games, and one of the games that I remember playing a lot of fondly is the first Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I started off my my love of games started off mostly with like builder games like that. Loved Roller Coaster Tycoon, loved those kind of games. I got into all the weird sim games. Like I love Sim City too, but I also got into like Sim Tower and like all these other ones that don't really exist anymore. Um, and then uh, we I got old enough that I got my own computer. Um, and it was an okay computer. It could run stuff like Thief, uh, somewhat somewhat like decently. It was still pretty like low frame rate. Um, but one of the first games that I played and I was kind of like, oh wow, this is awesome. Was the second Aliens vs Predator shooter by Monolith. Um, I got that game. I don't even remember how I got that game. I think I like bought it with like allowance money that I stored up after a couple months, and was like, this looks cool. I like aliens. I'm gonna try this out. And that was like my foray into like online multiplayer was Aliens vs Predator 2, which is a very weird way to enter that scene, but um I loved it, and that kind of started my love of like first person shooters too.
And that's awesome. You know, like you said, it is a weird way, and I mean this in no negative sense. A weird way to enter like the online deathmatch style game,
Yeah.
and only because it is I don't know the right word for this because it's not asynchronous. It's not a versus really. Because you have like, you know, three different groups, all that are very different that do very specific things. So that's that's a cool way to enter just because you know, you don't jump in there with the same view as some that might have started with Doom or Quake or Team Fortress or, you know, any of those games that are very much side versus side because those are, you know, just easy, you know, yeah, you have a red versus blue, and this one you have red, yellow, and blue all doing different things. So that's an interesting way to get into it.
Yeah, it's chaos. And that game's combat was like just chaos. And I kind of ended up loving it for that. Like I've played a lot of like multiplayer shooters over the years, but I've always I don't really care for balance all that much. Like there's some people who really care about like, oh, the game has to be balanced. But I kind of love that element of the old Aliens, and this also counts for the first Aliens vs Predator because I went back and played that as well, and all those games are so imbalanced, but they're hilarious. They're so funny. Like someone will get like the smart gun or the predator disc and just like destroy everyone, and it's just sort of like it's just chaos, but it's such fun chaos.
I agree completely. You know, I through high school, one of my classes for me and a handful of us was supposed to be, you know, learning about computers and programming. Um, quickly turned to us finishing the assignments and then just doing LAN parties. And one of the games we went to was always Aliens versus Predator 2. I don't know how it got on there. One of us brought it in. We had it on our own little LAN machine while, you know, we finished our stuff and other people were still, you know, learning. Um, and it was, you're right, it was pure chaos because, you know, there would be people like fighting at one point and then, you know, just a cloaked predator would send a spike through, and suddenly someone's pegged to the wall, and the room scatters because now there's this brand new element that no one else was expecting that is very capable of ruining everyone.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, and that's like I said, that's just a fantastic way to get into it because from there on you're already, like you said, prepared for the imbalanced um gameplay of everything.
Yeah, and I did, once I sort of got my foot in the door on those games, I did go back and play like the first and second Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem, Blood, all that, because I was sort of like I I've never really been a graphics kind of person. Like there's elements that I appreciate about them, but I've always been willing to go back and play older games, and there was never a point in time where it was like, oh, I'm not going to play Doom because it's like it's old sprite work. I always just appreciated those games for the technology that was capable at the time, and found them sort of beautiful in their own way. I still think Doom One has like a really distinct aesthetic that I think really works.
I completely agree. Like, and it's I think with the resurgence of that style coming back, maybe not a one to one of that style, outside of a few games that are, actually using those old engines still or
Hmm.
modified versions of those old engines. But I think, I agree completely. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way because, you know, you have you have this chance to make this beautiful sprite work um, without the limitations of I'm not a game designer, so forgive the random jargon that is probably not right. But you don't have to worry about how many triangles or whatever are in your 3D model when you are intentionally just focusing on making it look as good as possible in a lo-fi kind of way.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely an element, and I think that honestly, sprite work is really difficult to do well. I've I've never been like a person who draws sprites, but as you know, like New Blood is, is also working on another game called Fallen Aces, and that game is all drawn sprite work. Um, and I've kind of the way New Blood is set up, we kind of all get to see how each other's projects are progressing during the meetings and during like seeing other people update their projects and their channels. So I've had the opportunity to see kind of how someone makes a game like that, and it is exhausting. Like I'll watch Trey like have to draw out every frame of a walk cycle, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of work, but it also looks awesome.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Like you can't help but respect people that are and I don't mean this in a negative way to anyone else because you got to, what everyone's doing in the gaming scene is typically going to be great work. It's they're going to be passionate about it, um, and it's never easy. But watching people that are great at doing sprite work is a whole other world because you're not just building a model and then rigging it and doing um, whatever comes from animating. There we go. With sprite work you have to do every frame that you want it to be. So if it needs to be 24 frames, you're doing 24 frames, and
Yep.
that's, like you said, that's exhausting. And you can't help, from the outside looking, you just have to respect that because that is astronomical amounts of work that is probably not as appreciated as it really should be.
Yeah, and it's like a walk cycle, especially considering that he's doing the Doom thing where enemies can walk at different angles. So there's like 8 different angles that an enemy can walk at. So when you're doing a walk cycle, you have to do it 8 times because it has to be, they could be walking towards you, they could be walking back, they could be walking like down to the left. it's wild. There is like so much work involved, and I'm like, how like I have a lot of patience, but I don't think I have that much patience.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, I'm on that same page with you. That's yeah. Like I said, it's you have to respect the ability that people have to do that. Now, I feel I know the answer to this just because I think we already kind of touched on it. But what makes games enjoyable to you?
um, so I think I'm always willing to uh forgive a game is not really the right term. I can put up with a lot in a game as long as the atmosphere is good. Um, Essentially, when I play games, what I'm really looking for is to be transported to somewhere else and to kind of feel like what this world might be like. And so the kind of games that have very in-depth atmosphere or very strong atmosphere, which are the games that I often talk about, like Thief and Stalker, and Bloodborne, and such. Those games always end up being my favorites because I really feel like there's a different world going on, and I feel transported there, and it's just such a cool feeling that I kind of it's like you just want to keep exploring somewhere else. And yeah, those are the kind of games that I really am drawn to and love, especially if it kind of feels like I don't have to put up with anything, and I just love like all the aspects of the game completely.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Like a game that doesn't. I'm trying to pick the words properly here. A game that doesn't grind on you is always fantastic. And like you said, if it's one that you can just be immersed in and there's no little nagging parts of it, that just really lets you kind of give all sense of disbelief. That's probably the
Yeah,
wrong word. But you can really just like let everything go and just be there, be present for it, right?
yeah, exactly.
So, kind of a follow up of that one. How is it that you enjoy gaming now?
Um, so funny enough, I think over the last so one thing I didn't really talk about earlier was um when I said that I've been making games for over a decade. That also includes the fact that I actually started by modding games. And since like I was a teenager, one of the first couple things I would do is like uh make maps for games like StarCraft and Warcraft 2 and stuff like that. Um, which I think kind of opened the door to, oh, maybe I could do this one day. But also I just like making maps for like the games that I really like. So there was a large portion of my time was modding and mapping and playing mods, and then I kind of went and played like, oh, I played Thief and System Shock and Bloodborne and all that. And now it's a little funny because now I'm kind of getting back to not modding myself, but playing other people's mods of the games that I really like. So a lot of the time I will play like custom maps for Thief and kind of and see like what that community kind of like makes, because some of the maps they make are just like bonkers amazing, like even beyond like the capability of what Looking Glass like could have done when those games came out. And I also play a lot of Stalker Anomaly, which is just combines the three games and like makes it uh, considerably harder. I think the idea behind uh, Stalker Anomaly is kind of how do you make it feel like a someone who's already played a lot of the Stalker games? How do you make them feel like they're playing Stalker again for the first time? Um, So a lot of my gameplay experience lately has just sort of been tweaking and modding the games that I already kind of love, and of course I do put aside some time to try new games. So I'm not like, I'm also exploring new stuff. And the last couple months, I played Cruelty Squad, which is going to be the hardest game to describe to anyone ever. Um, but it's basically Deus Ex, but on acid. it's uh, it's an absolutely crazy game, um, where all your augments are just like you throw an intestinal rope and you climb it, and so it's crazy. It really defies like explanation. Um, and then I started recently playing another indie called Mundown, which is uh, a pencil black and white horror kind of a Swiss Alps like folklore exploration game. Um, and both those two games are both indie and super excellent, and absolutely deserve attention.
And yeah, definitely, just to briefly touch on those two things you just said there. I'm gonna have to look at Cruelty Squad because that sounds bananas. Um,
It's crazy. It it's one of those games where you'll see videos of it and you'll be like, how does anyone like this? And somehow when you play it, it's like, oh my god, how is this good? Like, how is this like actually fun? But it's great. It's really snuck up on me too. Like the dev sent me a key at some point in like January or February, and I was like, oh wow, this looks crazy. I'll try it. I'll try it later on a weekend. I was expecting to be like, okay, I'll play it for like 20 to 30 minutes, and I'll be like, oh, this game was cool, and then I couldn't stop. I was like, oh my god, what is this? Yeah, it's great. David and I talk about that game quite a bit.
yeah, yeah, I understand exactly what you were meaning. I just looked at a quick screenshot, and yep, okay.
Yeah,
Definitely
yep.
gonna have to look that up, and yep, go from there. Um,
It's wild though. You play it and it's like, wow, this the ideas here are actually amazingly good, and it's weird. It's so weird. It's really hard to convince people to play it, and it's totally understandable because of the way it looks. But when you play it, it's like, oh, I, this works crazy.
and just to quickly touch on Mundown, or probably butchered how that's pronounced, but yeah, I've seen that, and yeah, that's wild that it is being hand drawn with pencil. That is a lot of dedication. So that one I'm also looking forward to, just from the, if you will, artistic merit of it.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous game, and I think David has touched upon this on his Twitter, but there's a real sense of culture to that game because the developer is Swiss himself, and it feels like a game that is wrapped lovingly in its culture and like folklore, and it feels very mysterious, and I love that element of it. It really does feel like you're 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 going to somewhere very different.
Hmm. And yeah, that's always a fantastic part of games, because an immersive game doesn't always have to be throwing you into the fantastic world of Skyrim or whatever. It can just be throwing you into the fantastic world of the Swiss Alps, as
Yeah, but it feels very
mundane.
mysterious.
Sorry.
No, no, it's fine. Like it feels very mysterious in its own way because it's got like all that culture's like urban legends and like, oh, the old man that lives on the mountain that like may curse you and help you and stuff like that. It's very weird, but it's really cool.
Yeah, and like what I was saying, it was in air quotes when I said mundane, but like from a grounded perspective of we live here, the idea of the Swiss Alps, oh well, that's just the Swiss Alps, but like no, what you just said is right. It's there's they're steeped in folklore and a different culture, and what is normal to one person is very much not going to be normal to the other, and that's just a fantastic thing to just get quote unquote real world experience. Um, without having to, without having to go and do that. Um, I know that what I just said is very wrong wordy, but I hope anyone who hears that kind of understands what I'm trying to say. So, Dylan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question because I really like asking and hearing where, where it kind of came from and where it goes or what have you. And you said you started, making mods or maps or what have you over a decade ago, and it was led into you being a full fledged. I don't mean that in a negative way, but a full fledged game developer.
Hmm.
Um, is there any advice, like the do's and don'ts, I guess you would say, that you could give to anyone looking to get into the industry based on your experience?
Um, I think that the best advice that I can give you is that for you shouldn't wait for all that stuff to sort of come to you. A lot of I've taken some I did like a minor in game design stuff, and all I really sort of came away from it with was to make games you really need that attitude of going out there and like figuring stuff out for yourself. Like a huge part of making games is solving problems and like finding the solutions to those problems. And fortunately, the internet has become an incredibly amazing resource for doing that. And much of it is free, which is fantastic. But even today, if I have like a problem that I'm stuck on, like in code or like in an engine, I have other developers I can ask for help, but I can also just search the internet and find other people who've had the same problem and solve it that way. And that's really like the most important skill you could possibly have if you're going to make games is not getting discouraged when you get stuck on a really difficult problem to solve, especially like early on where those difficult problems seem simple but are way more complicated than you might have anticipated. But it's very easy to be like, oh, I can't do this really simple thing. This is really hard. I'm gonna like give up on it. And it's like you can't. If you want to be if you want to make games, you gotta like stick through it and persist, even if it takes a while, and just like keep going and trying trying to get better at solving those problems because it's a difficult profession. There's a lot of like stumbling blocks, and it really can be easy to be like, this is going nowhere. It's taking so long to work on this thing, and every developer knows that feeling. But sticking with it and persisting is being very not getting frustrated when you encounter stuff like that, and just being like, okay, I'm gonna look this up. I'm gonna do a couple of tutorials. I'm gonna solve this, and then once I've solved it, I know how to fix this kind of problem in the future. That's the attitude you really need in this industry, and yeah, just for making games in general.
And yeah, thank you for that advice because that's very important for a broad scope as well, kind of thing. But that's a thing that I don't think a lot of people actively talk about is what you just said, and that if you get stuck on something, there's people that have encountered that before, and asking for help doesn't mean you're not capable of understanding it or anything else. It just means you've hit a problem, and there's probably other people that have hit that problem and are more than happy to help you not be in that problem anymore, right?
Yeah, and even now, like I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm still it really pays off to not be afraid to ask like dev friends even simple questions like, oh, I don't actually know how to do this. um that's fine. Like it's such a complicated field, and computers are so complicated that even if you don't know how to do something that seems like it should be really simple, like that's fine. Ask someone, and then you'll know how to do it. And often, it you can pass on that knowledge to someone else one day. Like someone else may ask, like, "Hey, I don't know how to do this," and now you know.
Exactly, and, as someone that is also a, developer, I don't not a game making developer, but a developer, um, there's also times where, you'll be doing something and the way you figured out to do it on your own might be overly complex and just bananas. And then you mention it to someone or you're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm stuck on this," and you say what you're doing. There's always a chance that that other person's going to look at you and say, "You can just do this," and it does that way easier, right? And
Yes.
then suddenly like 3 days of work for you is gone because what you were trying to do is easily fixable in an entirely separate way that takes, 10 minutes to do, right?
Yeah. God, that yeah, that is such a like programmer thing to run into.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely overthink a lot of problems.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, it's always good to have discourse between everyone, especially if it's, you're stuck on something, just ask for help, right? Um so Dylan, I don't want to keep you for too much longer, especially on, this weekend. Because of the time of recording this, it's the Easter weekend. Um So, I don't want to keep you for too much longer. However, if is there anything that you would like to talk about? Is there anything that, you feel we missed that you feel everyone needs to hear about, or just, just anything you want to discuss? I'm giving you a soapbox to get on if you feel the need.
Um, see here. I'm just looking over the questions you sent me real quick.
Sure. And like, don't feel compelled to answer any of those questions. It's more, if there's just something, you feel people need to be aware of, or just, some more information about your game if you want, or side projects, or just anything really. Like the floor is yours is what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, so one thing I will talk about is so clearly Gloomwood pays a lot of homage to Thief. Like we've marketed it like Thief with guns, all that kind of stuff. And clearly the aesthetic and the style of it is very Thief. But I think what's interesting, and people may not realize this when they're going in, especially if they've never played Thief before, is that it we've made something that, or we're trying to make something that feels like Thief, but isn't just playing Thief again. Like I've had some people sort of play the game and be like, oh, like I don't get why there's like guns. Like Thief didn't have guns, and it's like, yes, but we're not really just trying to make Thief again. Like I could just try and make like Thief again. Like I could just, oh, we're gonna put it in a blackjack and we're gonna remove all the guns, and we're gonna give you flash bombs and moss arrows and all that. But the thing is, we've all already played Thief. If I just made Thief again, it'll kind of just feel like what's the purpose of the game really? Like Thief already exists. We've already played that. So one thing that I'm trying to push is that I want the game to kind of feel like the first time someone's played Thief, but it's kind of its own thing. Like it welcomes you in with that familiarity, but hopefully it will start to encourage people to sort of see it as its own kind of experience. And I feel like Dusk is a little bit like that too. Like Dusk really has that, it feels like, feels and looks like Quake and like Blood and all that. But once you like get to like the second episode of Dusk, it really kind of starts to feel something really different, and it's kind of its own thing. And that's what I'm trying to do with Gloomwood as well. Like welcome people in with those familiarities, and then let them sort of explore, mechanics that do fit this genre, like the inventory is very Arx Vitalis, and the seeking's very Thief, but maybe a combination of things that m- make the game kind of play in its own way, if that makes sense.
No, and that makes perfect sense. Like I said, if when I looked at your YouTube channel for what was coming or the mechanics you're experimenting with, um, it it excited me because not to say I wasn't on board for a Thief game, but seeing all this new stuff made me go, "Oh, it's not just a Thief game." And that had me excited for a myriad of different reasons. And one of them was because it wasn't going to just be a Thief game. Not, like I said, not to say anything bad against just a Thief game,
Right.
but so yeah, and then anyone that's listened to this or listening to this, and if they want an idea of what kind of those mechanics are, definitely they should check out your YouTube channel to see those because it's I don't say this in a negative way, and I just don't have a better way to say it, but the alpha is almost deceptive or deceiving in what it's setting you up to do, if only because it's kind of like it looks like you're going to be, that I'm going to call it like a tutorial area or what have you. And then you open the door and you walk out and you're like, oh, wow, this is very much more than I ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
Like I
Y-
said, I decept was the wrong word, but I mean it in the most positive of ways possible.
Yeah, and I totally understand it too, because like this is one of the difficulties of working on a game like this, because we're constantly working on the game in ways that is not just like, oh, we're adding more levels, but we're constantly working on like, oh, here's a new system, or like we're gonna rework the system to be better. And the results of that is that the stuff from the demo is gonna feel older because we're constantly working on the game, and it's sort of the question there is like, oh, like what do we do with the demo now that it's sort of like kind of old and crusty and doesn't really represent what the game is like. And so far we've just sort of been like, that's fine, we'll leave the demo up so people can still get that taste, but the game, the next portion of content, the early access, is definitely going to feel like a big step up, I think. And people are going to notice that if you play the demo.
And hopefully everyone is as receptive to it as they should be because I think it's fantastic because you're walking into something that's just so much richer in the sense of an experience. So I hope everyone else is just as receptive to it as what you're trying to present because it would be a real shame for people to be upset about that. I think that's the safest way I can put it.
Yeah, and it would probably be worse if it was the other way, where the demo was really good, but the game itself wasn't good. But fortunately, I think it's going to be the other way around, where it's sort of like, oh, the demo was early days. It was like really alpha, but the game that we're putting out there is I think going to be quite special.
It definitely looks like it's going to be just from what I've seen on YouTube. So yeah, I'm fingers crossed for you, and fingers crossed for New Blood because it's uh, I think games that you're making and games that New Blood is publishing or helping with or what have you. I think those are games that need to be made still. Because we don't need to always have it be big AAA titles that have a huge budget that that if that game doesn't do as amazing as they hope that game is then shuttered. It's We need to have games that are smaller scoped in sense of not AAA, with real passionate people and publishers that are behind it, for a fan base that hopefully is just as passionate for what is being delivered.
Absolutely, and honestly, like never in my wildest dreams did I think that when I started this game, I never thought it would get to this point. Like when I started this project files, I thought I was gonna be like, oh, I'll make this, I'll put it on Steam, like 6 people will play it, and I'll move on. I never imagined like it would have a publisher, and it would be like people are streaming it and talking about it, and it's like that is wild, and I'm forever grateful to all the fans and just anyone who's like spread the word about it or talked about it. It really it's given me a lot of like excitement, inspiration, and yeah, it really is amazing.
And you know what, Dylan? You've earned it. I think the most straightforward way I can say is you've earned it. Like it looks like it's going to be a fantastic game. The demo plays fantastically. So like I think, like I said, I just think it's straight as that. You've earned everything that's coming to you for the reception of this game. It's from what I played, I felt it was fantastic, and I I think it'll be very difficult for me, and hopefully people like me to say anything incredibly negative about it. And I hope, and this is a weird negativity thing to say, I think, but I hope the worst thing that you hear for this game is that people say it wasn't. They were hoping it was just going to be Thief, and that's the worst thing they say.
Yeah, and I'm totally fine with that. Like I'm totally fine with someone being like, this isn't my thing. Totally fine. I'm like that with games all the time. And like it like I'm when you're in this business long enough, that's sort of, you just encounter that. And it's totally fine. Like there's more people out there that are more like us and are like, oh, these kind of games are really cool and I love this and like this is what I'm looking for. And that's the kind of people that I appeal to. And it's totally fine if not everyone's like that. Like not everyone's a Stalker fan. Totally fine with that. Some people start that game up and are like, this is and just like uninstall it immediately. And that's their thing. That's fine. I love the game, and that's, to me, that's really all that matters.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I wasn't trying to be negative a moment ago, but yeah, especially if you're making a game that you're loving as well, I think end of day that's also real important because developers are people too, and I think fundamentally a lot of developers get into developing because they want to make a game for them. They want to make their vision of a game.
Yeah.
So as long as you have that feeling that you're delivering what you want. At the end of the day, it's if as long who cares what other people say, because if it does well, that's just icing on the cake, right? Because the cake is you made this game that you wanted and you're enjoying it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Dylan, like I said, I don't want to keep you for too much longer. So if there was nothing else you wanted to throw out there, I'll let you get back to your Sunday.
I think we're good, and
Okay.
I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the conversation.
Oh no, you know what? The pleasure's all mine. Really, I owe you all the thanks for making the time for me. Um, yeah. So thank you. That's just an honor to be thanked for that. That's a weird thing to say. I'm sorry,
Sorry.
but yeah, no. If there's nothing else that you want to get out there, I'll wrap it up. I'll let you get back to your Sunday. So thanks again for joining me on the Red Tunic podcast, and a special thanks to you, Dillon Rogers, for making some time to have this conversation with me. As well, a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from his title track of Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe to receive the latest updates, and be sure to share it with those you think also might enjoy it. It would also help me a lot. Anyway, thanks again. Until next time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.